Hello everyone and welcome to the studio. Karen Margulis here, and today I have the solution to a problem that many of us have been having with fixative. Now, I don't use a final fixative on my pastel paintings, but I do love using workable fixative. I like to use the fixative for a darkening effect and for a texture effect, and the fixative that I have been using and been recommending unfortunately now is no longer being manufactured. So I've had to find a solution, and I think I have that solution. I'm going to share that with you, and I'm going to do a demonstration to show you just how it works. So come on closer to the easel and we'll get started. So let's talk about fixatives, workable fixatives, and what I have been using. I've been using the Blair Very Low Odor Spray Workable Fixative, which, as I said, is no longer being manufactured. I still have a few cans stashed away, but I needed to find another solution. My goal when I use workable fixative is just to kind of get the darks darker. I actually want darker darks, and I want there to be kind of a rough texture. Not every workable fixative gives me those same results. I have tried them. So I've been kind of struggling with what should I do instead. So I have tried water in a spritz bottle, because that does, once it dries, if you don't get it too wet, it will fix it slightly, but it takes a long time to dry. So then I started with the idea of trying some rubbing alcohol, which I use all the time in my paintings for wet underpainting, so alcohol wash. If you're familiar with that technique, it's a great technique. But I thought, what if I put it in a spray bottle and sprayed it on very lightly and use it as a fixative? And I've got a continuous spray bottle. So this is different from a regular spray bottle because it makes a nice fine mist, and so you don't get big wet spray, because the idea is you want a light spray. If you spray too much of the alcohol, or water for that matter, you will liquefy your pastel and it will drip, and you'll actually end up with an alcohol wash. Not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes you don't want that effect. You just simply want to fix or create that darkening effect. Now let me show you the result of using these three products. Alright, so let's see the results of all three of these. And basically what I've done is I've made a dark passage of a dark purple, a dark blue, and a dark red violet. And then I sprayed them with the three products here, and then I came back with a lighter value and scumbled it, which is just simply means using the side of the pastel with a light touch, and see the results of what happens. So with the rubbing alcohol, I got a nice darken effect to the pastel, and I did get the pastel skip over the dark, so we reveal some of the dark underneath, which gives it a textured effect. Now let's look at the Blair. We get the same thing. The texture is a little bit more pronounced, but I am happy to say that I still got texture with the rubbing alcohol, and really that's what I'm looking for. This is the water, this is the least amount of texture. Now let me show you what happens. I didn't do it in my sample, but let me show you what happens when I don't use any fixative. And I'm going to go right ahead on this paper here, which I'm going to do our demo on, but that's okay, we'll be able to cover it up. This actually is going to be a dark area. So let's just assume I'm building up my layers of dark. I like to use a light touch, and I'm building up my layers of dark here, same as I did in the sample. And now I want to put the same pastel on top. Look what happens. What happens? It just kind of mushes together, and it gets muddy, and it's just flat. I don't get that textured effect. The pastel doesn't skip over those bottom layers. It just kind of blends all together, and the pastel that I put on top acts like a blending stick, and it just ends up being mushy and muddy, and that's really not what I'm after. But I'm happy to say the rubbing alcohol in this continuous spray bottle is doing a very similar job to the Blair, and that's what I'm after in many of my landscape paintings. So if you like to use workable fixative, you might want to consider trying some rubbing alcohol in the continuous spray bottle. And by the way, I got that bottle on Amazon. Just look for continuous spray bottle. You can find all kinds of variations on that bottle. So what I want to do now is use the rubbing alcohol in the spray bottle to show you how I put it into action. So we'll do a complete demonstration painting for you. I want to show you the pastels that I'm using, and I'll show you our reference photo. But before I do that, I want to take just a second to say, please, if you like what you're seeing here on this YouTube channel, like, subscribe, give comments. All those things really help get the word out that you like this kind of content, you want to see more, and it really does help, and subscribing is no cost to you. So please go ahead and do that. I would love that. If you want more in depth, I have a group on patreon.com, and we go deep dive into all things pastel. There's over 300 videos there now, 500 my cameraman says. Okay, so join me over on Patreon if you want even more. All right, now let's get to the demo. All right, before we start the demo, let's talk about the supplies I'll be using. I like to pre-select my palette of pastels before I start a painting, or I'll work out of a box of limited colors so that I don't go overboard with color and get too crazy. If I can pick them out in advance, then I know that I'm going to have a more comprehensive, more limited, pleasing palette. So I'll look at my scene, and here, by the way, is what we're going to be painting: a moody, foggy day on the marsh, kind of almost abstracted. And I pick some darks, some middle values, some colors for the grasses, and some colors for the sky and the water. And then I have some hard pastels that I'll use for some of the finishing details, some of the grass marks. This is a variety of both Terry Ludwig and Diane Townsend soft form pastels that I'll be using. I may dip into some other pastels and add to this, and I may not use every single pastel on this tray, but by starting with a limited palette, it really allows me to have more control over what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up, and the paper that I'll be using today is a piece of Uart. It's 11 by 14, and this is a 400 grit, so I like to use that middle grit. We're going to just do a dry wash underpainting today, but then I'm going to do a little bit of experimenting with our rubbing alcohol as a fixative and both as a means of getting some interest in the painting. All right, let's look at the photo, and we see we just have a couple of big simple shapes. We have our sky, our water, and our grass. I would say that this painting is mostly focused on the story is really about the grasses and the colors in the grass, and then how things just get enveloped in the fog. So I'm going to raise the horizon line so that I can showcase more of that grass. By the way, I'm just simply using a pencil, and I'm using a very light touch. One thing that I have to remember about marshes, when we paint the marsh, we want to make sure that that horizon line is perfectly straight and level. So I'm going to have to make sure that I maintain that. And then we have that little dip. You can hardly see that, but the water just kind of goes back. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing the shape of the land masses where the grasses and the banks kind of connect, instead of drawing this water shape. And by doing that, I get a much more solid, believable feeling. And I'm just playing around by indicating where some of these grasses and details are going to be. This area is going to be darker. This area is going to be darker. This area up here is going to be darker. All the edges of the banks. And here we're going to cover up this little area where I was showcasing the non-fixative, the non-use of fixative. All right, now I have my drawing in place. So what I want to do is I want to block in the shapes using just 4 values, and I'm going to use 1 color and 4 values. And I decided that I'm going to use purple for my block in. And purple, because I know I'm going to have a lot of green or yellow and some yellowy green. So having some purple underneath, I think, is going to make it interesting because of the complements and how nicely they can play together. So wherever I see dark, I'm going to put in some of the darker value. Now as I go into the distance, I can't keep it this dark, so as the painting progresses, I will get these areas lighter. Then I will look and see if I have the lightest areas, and that's going to be the sky, so I'm going to use a lighter value purple for our sky. And I'm just using the side of my pastel, and I don't have to have complete coverage because I'm going to blend that all in. Then I'm going to look and say, well, all right, is there anything like distant, like a distant piece of land? And I'm going to use that a little bit of a darker value, but not quite as dark as the edges of the bank. Again, we're going to add some mystery to this area in the distance because it's so foggy and misty. And now for all the rest of the grass, I'm using a middle value purple. So I'm trying to get a 4 value underpainting. And the other light area is the water. So we're going to go ahead and put the water, but notice I'm putting the water in using horizontal strokes. That's going to help give that illusion of that the flatness of the water. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to rub it all in. Now we could easily do an alcohol wash with this and wet everything with the rubbing alcohol. But for the sake of showing that you don't always have to do a wet wash to have an interesting painting, I'm just using a piece of packing foam to rub this pastel into the paper. And what this does is it gives me an interesting, out of focus, very moody start, which is exactly what I want for this particular scene. Alright, so there we have our underpainting. I call that a dry wash underpainting. I'm going to have to make sure I keep that straight and level, but a lot of that's going to be obscured. Alright, so once I have the underpainting in place, I go ahead and start by reinforcing my dark areas. And what I'm going to be doing is just taking the same colors that I used and repeating them, but I'm going to add more colors of the similar value so I can get a little bit more interesting. And I got to make sure that these little areas of land where they kind of jut out are not equal. You don't want them to have equal spacing or the same shape or size, because that would not be very interesting. So that is one layer, and like I did on the sample that I was showing you, I'm adding another layer of dark, but it's very close in value to what is already there. Let's add another layer. This is a dark blue. Again, I'm doing this so that I can get some complexity in my layering, and that's just going to make it a little bit more interesting. I could use dark brown because it's like gray, yellow grass is dark brown, dark green. And here is the dark brown I'm coming in now. If I just use the dark brown alone, it would not have as much interest as if I was able to build up layers. And that's the beauty of pastel, building up those layers. Alright, and I just want to point out, I encourage you to stick with me to the end of the video, because I know a lot of times these paintings that I do go through the ugly stage, and I know people tell me, well, I don't think, I stopped watching because I didn't think that she was going to do anything with that painting. So stick with me, because it does go through that teenager stage, so we need to get past that. I just added another purple, but this is a little bit lighter value than the darks in the foreground, because we got to consider that things are going to get lighter and cooler and duller and fuzzier as we go into the distance. All right, now I'm going to do something with that alcohol spray, because once I have all these darks in place, I really want to fix them so that when I add the lighter colors on top, they have that textured effect. So I'm taking my continuous spray bottle and I'm just very lightly giving it a spritz. Now here's where you have to be careful. With that Blair very low odor fixative, it dries very, very quickly. So like it would be dry by now almost, and I would be able to paint on it. With the rubbing alcohol, it takes longer to dry. So you want to plan ahead. If you're going to use the rubbing alcohol spray, know that you either need to take a break at this point or you need to move on to another part of the painting so that the fixed areas can dry. The other thing is you get an overspray. So I don't know if it shows up on the camera, but I have all kinds of little dots that came in the water. It works for most of my paintings because I have a lot of wild, grasses and weeds and all that. But if you want to be more precise, you will need to use something to block the spray so that you keep it confined to the areas where you want it. So that's just a couple things to keep in mind. The other thing that you can do with the fixative, and I'm only going to do it in one area because we don't want to wait for this to dry, but you can use the rubbing alcohol as a wet wash. So here I sprayed more than I really intended to. And what's happening is it's liquefying the pastel and it's starting to drip, which is more akin to an alcohol wash without using a brush. Look what's happening. We're getting some drip. A lot of times you can come in there and encourage them a little bit more. You can spray it and get it as wet as you want and you'll get even more drips. But for the sake of this demo, I just wanted to showcase that that is another way you can use the continuous spray rubbing alcohol. You can do a complete alcohol wash and never pick up a brush and let some interesting things drip and dribble and have fun with it. But while this whole area dries, I'm going to go ahead and address the lighter areas and start at the back and work my way forward. So before I go any further with the sky, I just want to indicate where that horizon is. I'm going to let some of that purple peek through, and I'm using a dull, kind of a yellowish brown, but I really want to push it into the distance. I'm going to also come in with a grayed green, and I'm using horizontal strokes for this and keeping the marks kind of close together. We have little banks down here that remember we established early on, and I just want to use a little bit of a darker dull green to kind of reestablish the tops of those banks. And I added just a little bit of a lighter kind of gray violet just to start that feeling of hazy stuff in the distance. And then I straightened it out just a little bit. But now I can turn my attention to the sky. And I feel like the sky has some purples, some greens. A lot of times we think of a foggy day as it being white, like a whiteout, right? But if we really pay attention, there's really a lot more color than we initially might think. And so I'm going to start off with some green, and I'm making some marks to help pull the eye down into the painting. So I've got some green. This is a little bit darker than I actually want the sky to be, but I'll start darker and I can always brighten it up. Now I'm going to add a little bit of a blue-green, and I'm just kind of letting these colors mingle to create some color in the sky. I also see some yellow, and I think this is going to be, this is a definitely brighter yellow than I want it to be. But again, with pastel, always easier to dull things down, to tone things down, than it is to bring it back up, to get it darker. So I always go darker and bolder than I might want, and then I know I can make adjustments. Now here's another green. This is a little bit of a warmer green. I want to cover up this yellow, but I definitely want some of it to peek through. So basically I'm just building up some layers of color that I am eventually going to cover up. So now I'm going to come in with a lighter value yellow. It's almost white, but it definitely has more color to it than white. And right at the horizon, I'm going to put that color, and I'm going to, as I come over that purple area in the distance, I'm very lightly scumbling this pale yellow just to kind of hide it in the mist. That's how I'm creating that fogginess, that mistiness. Just lighten up my touch so that I'm just barely skipping over the color. Now, I'm finding that the yellow that I put down is a little bit too warm, right, for a foggy day. It almost looks like the sun is trying to burn through, which that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not really the effect I was going after, so I'm going to add a few more layers to cover that up. Alright, and then the other thing is I see some of the purple from the underpainting peeking through, and that's something that I really want to preserve. So I don't want to make my layers too thick. Here I have a lot of layers, I don't see the underpainting anymore, but in these areas that purple kind of pulls everything together. So I'm going to do something else to brighten up the sky without making it too warm and sunny. This is a green pearlescent pastel. And it's super hard to see on the video or even photos, but in real life, when you have a pearlescent pastel that you use, it's really beautiful. It's like got a gem-like quality. I'll try to zoom in closer when we're done so that you can have an idea of the effect, but I'm putting some thicker marks of this pearlescent to really, you know, when you see it in real life, it's just got this wonderful kind of glow to it. So I like to use it in the skies. All right, so now I can work my way down, and I'm going to start to address the grasses. And I'm going to start at the back and just reinforce some of these colors that I already put down. Then I'm going to put another layer down so that we can start to see them. And I'm going to introduce a little bit more of the yellow ochre just to connect it to what's going to happen in the foreground. And again, in these back layers I'm using horizontal bands because we wouldn't see the individual blades of grass. And I want to make sure I preserve some of those darker areas underneath. Let's see. As I start to move kind of closer to our foreground area, I will start to change the direction of my pastel. Now we have this area here is all grass, but I want to add some other darker colors underneath just so that when I add the lighter yellows, there's a little bit more interest. And I'm going to pull this same dark down on top of the areas where I use the fixative. So we're going to get that kind of skipping over effect that I'm after. And it's working nicely, so I'm really excited about the possibilities of the rubbing alcohol. And I think really what makes it successful is using that continuous spray bottle. It really gives you more control over the mist. Oops. I need to, let's see, I'm going to start to bring in more of those brighter yellow ochre. And we need to connect them so we need to pull them into the previous layers so that we don't have this parfait effect with our lines of grass. That makes sense. I'm going to put in a little bit of a dull gray green here because remember, we want to start to hide some of this stuff. We want it to have more of a misty quality. So we're going to go back over and get that mist, but I'm using this grayed down green to kind of promote that in this area. Now some of the grasses, the lighter grasses start to move down into the darker areas here. And we're also seeing a lot of linear marks, some grass marks, and I think we'll use some of those hard pastels to get that effect. But we're at the stage now where we need to put in the water, because we can't really tell how much we need to do to the grass till we get some of that water in. And the good news is that we have the colors that we used in the sky are going to be the same colors that we're going to use in the water. So that's another good reason to pre-select your pastels and keep a tray going. All right, so watch what I'm doing. I'm sneaking the water in between those little bands of grass, and I'm using the colors that I have in the lower portion of the sky. I think I'm going to enhance that while I'm at it. So this lighter yellow, and then as we go up into the sky, the colors change a little bit, and then I'm going to make that happen in my grasses. I'm going to do one extra thing. I'm taking my finger and lightly pulling down some of those dark areas, and that's going to give me a head start on the reflections of the grasses in the water. Alright, so then we're going to move to that kind of grayish green. I love this color. And then what else did I use up there? I'm just looking at the sky at some of the colors that I already used. I'm going to sneak some of that water right in here. And by the way, when you're working from photos, you don't have to have an exact copy of the way the grasses in the water are in your photo. Sometimes these things take on a life of their own. I'm going to make the water a little bit darker as we're in the foreground. Now I'm going to do one more thing. Normally I would spray the grasses once again with some workable fixative. So this time I'm using the continuous spray bottle. We have to wait. Unfortunately, that's the drawback of the rubbing alcohol. So we're going to let this dry for just a second, and then we'll come right back and we'll finish. Alright, so now the fixed area is just about dry. It really is only a couple of minutes, which is not bad considering that it's doing the job that I want. So I'm not going to complain about that. Just work it into your plan. Alright, so now that it is dry, I'm going to pull some of the light down into the grasses just a little bit more. And then I'm going to take the color that I have for this bottom part of the water, and I'm going to very lightly pull it over where the grasses are. And that's going to help give that illusion of the grasses kind of growing out of the water. I'm going to take my finger and just blend it a little bit more just to get kind of that watery illusion. And then I'm going to just do a little bit of kind of negative painting by taking this color that's in the water back on this clump of grasses. And instead of painting a bunch of individual grasses, I will do some, I'm using this background color, this water color, the color of the water, to kind of dig down into the grasses just to break that up a little bit more, in a little bit more of a painterly way. Now we can add some of that pearlescent to the water, kind of pulling our eye right over to this area, this clump of grass. We can just kind of sneak some of it down in the foreground as well. And we can really have fun playing with just a touch of that pearlescent stuff. The other thing that we can do with the water to get it to look watery is we can take some kind of sharp tool. I'm using a bamboo skewer and just kind of dragging it through this bottom part of the water just to break it up, just to kind of create some movement in the water. So what do we have left to do? Well, we need a few more details in this foreground grass, and we need to get this background to look a little bit mistier, foggier. So I'm going to go ahead and pump up the color in just some of these grassy areas. And this is actually a Sennelier half stick. And I'll use these for the finishing marks because they just have such intense color, but they're so much thicker. They're marks that they make, so I don't want to use them too early or it will fill the tooth of the paper too quickly. So I just want to just add a few of those, and I'm going to pull some of it up into that grassy area. And now I'm going to transition to some harder pastels. This is a Nupastel, and I'm going to use it just to get a little bit more detail in my grasses. And this is the part where it's really easy to get carried away and get too many busy blades of grass going. I'm using a dark green. But I have really nice texture happening because of that rubbing alcohol fixative trick, which is really nice. Really excited about that. So what I'm doing though is I'm increasing the contrast too in this area. So what I have more detail in the foreground, a little bit more intense in the colors, harder edges, which we're getting to. I like how some of these grasses are coming up, you know, it's low tide, so some of these guys are just poking up through. And I really try to stay focused so that I don't get too carried away with too many blades of grasses. It's super easy to do. But because I'm getting more detail here in the foreground, what's happening is my background is starting to recede, which is exactly what we want to happen. I'm going to push it just a little bit more, and that'll be the last thing that I do. There's a few blades that are getting some light down here in the lower portions, and then there's some that are actually darker. Put some darker grasses. When you get to this stage of the painting, I usually, if I'm not doing a video, I am constantly stepping back to evaluate. So I like that guy sticking up there. I'll make 2 or 3 marks and then I'll step back. 2 or 3 more marks and then I'll step back. But what I need to do now is I need to, let's get a little bit more moodiness going on. So we want to obscure our background. Make sure you start with a clean pastel. This is a light greenish yellow. And I'm dragging it over the distant layers, the distant part of the landscape. And I'm obscuring it ever so lightly. And I think, again, stepping back, what we want to do is have some of it obscured and then some of it peeking through. So obscure some and then come back and add more pastel just so we don't want to totally lose it. So again, go back and forth till you get it right. I like this really strong mark, but I think it might be a little too hard edged everywhere. I'm going to just soften it just a little bit. And I'm going to take this same pale yellow just to get some linear marks up in the sky. Just a little bit more interest in the sky, and again to help draw the eye down into the painting a little bit more. And this might be a little too bright. Let's just add a touch more of the blue to it. And I think I'm going to stop. But I hope you really enjoyed this video. I think the main thing for me was that I'm so excited that I think I'm finally going to not be so concerned that I can't use Blair Fixative anymore. Rubbing alcohol in a continuous spray bottle is doing the trick. And so I hope you've enjoyed the demo. I hope you've enjoyed the tip. Please like, subscribe, join me on Patreon. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for staying till the end. I really appreciate it. And I will see you next time. Let's paint.